to Vendetta Sports Media. Today we're here with the Daily Show. It is April 3rd. My name is James Herrick, joined by Jack Saban. Jack, how we doing?
Doing good today. No, it's a beautiful day out. Well, not beautiful for Reno, but all things considered, it's not snowing or raining right now. So
Yeah, I feel that we got a nice break in the snow, some sunshine in Michigan, which has been rare the last couple months. So I'm pumped. Good weather here too. But the most important story today in sports, or I guess it's last night, kind of bled over to this morning, was the Angel Reese and the women's basketball finals, college finals. It's been the biggest story. People are basically taking two sides on this. One side's basically Angel Reese's class list for taunting Caitlin Clark. The other side is it's sports. You can do whatever you want. Jack, what are your thoughts on it?
I probably tend more, or probably lean more towards the side of it's just sports and taunting is kind of part of it. I mean, these are young women who are still technically kids in college, playing in what's probably the biggest sports game of their life. I don't think you can expect them to just win a big game and do absolutely nothing. It was the same thing with the unwritten rules in baseball. I hated when people didn't like bat flips or showing up the pitcher. It's like it's sports. It's very high emotion or very highly emotional. A lot of ups and downs. And it's not like Caitlin Clark. I mean, she, from what I can understand, I don't watch too much women's college basketball, truth be told, but from everything I've understood, she's kind of a taunter too, and would taunt other teams when she would play good. So I
Mhm.
don't necessarily see an issue with it personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't really tend to get upset over taunting. With that being said, I don't think it was like that cool. Like everyone's acting like it was like the best taunt of all time.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of overblown. Like it was
What she do?
cool,
Like
I
she
guess.
pointed at her like ring finger or something like that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. She did the John Cena "You Can't See Me" because Caitlin Clark did it the round before, the game before.
Yeah, I guess
So
South Carolina.
yeah, so she did it back to her and then pointed towards the ring finger. It's like it's cool. That's a good taunt, but it's like I didn't really think it was like the best trash talk of all time. I didn't find it that entertaining. That's kind of where I'm hung up on it. Everyone's acting like she's like an all-time trash talker. I'm like, this is the most like average like
Yeah.
ever trash talk I've ever seen. It's nothing crazy. And the other thing that I don't like is that everyone like pretends that you have to be classless or classy in sports, right? It's like
Yeah.
discussion where is this classless? Is it not classless? It's like, well, even if it is classless, who cares? There's no rule that says you're actually supposed to have to be classy. It's like there's no written rule anywhere that says you have to be a good sport. That's what you're told. But it's like in truth, you can do whatever the hell you want. As long as you don't there's certain lines you can't cross. Like
Yeah.
want to talk about families, you don't want to do those types of things, which we're so far from that point in terms of actually crossing the line. So I think that's like the thing that I don't get is like why do people actually care if you're being quote unclassy or classless? Like I don't get that part of the conversation either.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The only thing I will say is I understood that like the initial taunting, but like in all the post game interviews, all they could talk about was Caitlin Clark. Like
Hmm.
all they could talk about was beating her and how it felt to beat her. And I'm just like, you just won a national championship, and the only thing on your mind is this Caitlin Clark girl. It just seemed like she was like in their heads, like rent free, the entire time. Like I understood getting your taunt out, maybe mentioning it like once or twice, but it was like all of them could only talk about, beating Angel Reese and the taunt. I was just like, I feel like if you win a national championship, you just want to be more focused about how happy you are to have won the national championship.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that, but I do agree with it because it's like the post game stuff I've never understood. I feel like there's always a level of that too. And not just in this instance, but it's also like I've never understood like Georgia had the players being like, you doubted us after they won the national championship last year. Travis Kelsey said some stuff like, you didn't expect us to be back here or whatever he said. I feel like that's like become a reoccurring thing where like players use something as motivation and then they kind of let that spiral into like the post game stuff when that like motivation that they've been using isn't actually like real criticism
Yeah,
that everyone has.
they'll take like the smallest thing. It reminds me of like that Last Dance Jordan documentary when Michael Jordan would like take anything. Be like, oh, you guys voted this guy as MVP. Well, I take it personally, so now I'm
Yeah.
gonna kill him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I don't think that's a bad like competitive mindset to have, but I also think it's like once you get up there and once you complete your goal, talk about what it means to like complete the goal rather than what the motivation was. I almost feel like
Yeah,
once you win the game, then all that becomes irrelevant because you just won.
yeah. I mean, like, you do whatever you gotta do to motivate yourself. It's like it's one thing to just motivate yourself, then it's another thing to like just sort of make stuff up. It's like you mentioned Travis Kelsey. It's like I feel like there was still a good amount of people who probably weren't too surprised that the Chiefs made it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And Georgia was the preseason number one. They were the number one team in the country. And then I don't remember who it was. I might have been, I want to say Nolan Smith, but I'm not 100% sure on that off the top of my head. But someone said the line like, people were saying we're going to win 6 or 7 games this year.
Yeah,
And
I remember that, and I was
it's
like,
like,
who? Who said that?
not a single person
Yeah.
said that. Not
Like,
one.
show me the receipt of who said that.
Yeah. And the other thing I will throw in on this like Angel Reese situation is it also the trash talk or the taunt isn't as cool when you're not the player that had the biggest impact on the game.
Yeah,
Like not even in a comparison to Caitlin Clark. But she had two players on her own team that outperformed her. I can't remember her name, but the one girl got really Carson got really hot in the first half and kind of brought that lead that they eventually rode out for the rest of the game. And I think it was their point guard, played really well in the second half. So it's like she's a good player, scored I think 15 points, but she was never the best player on the court. Even comparing her to her teammates, some of her teammates outperformed her. So that kind of takes a shine off it as well when you're not the number one player on the team. That takes some shine off the taunt as well. Not to discredit what she did or what LSU did, but it's like you're not the number one player on the floor, so the taunt isn't quite as cool at that point.
yeah, I definitely could get behind that. It's like you weren't the one person who kind of impacted the game the most. Doesn't really make sense for you to be, taunting the absolute most.
Yeah, I think we had this conversation or similar conversation about Eli Apple previously when we did a post Super Bowl or a post championship game. We had it about Russ. We had it about Russ or Pat Bev or something. But we've had this conversation before and have voiced similar thoughts too. Where if you're not the best player on the floor, the trash talk doesn't quite hit as hard.
Yeah, and I think it's almost a little bit different with guys like Pat Bev or someone just because like Pat Bev's become just like known as like that's his role.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like even if he finishes a game shooting 0 for 4 with 3 turnovers, he's still gonna be in your ear,
Mm-hmm.
you know, talking crap and whatnot, making life a living hell for you. But yeah, I can definitely get behind that where it's like you weren't like if you were, hitting the game winning shot or, with a clear number one player, then it's like, do whatever the heck you want, taunt as much as you want. But yeah, I mean, she was just kind of like a role player in that game. Didn't have a bad game by any means, but was not far and away the best player.
Yeah, and that's not to say she was, I'm not trying to say she was incredibly classless or any of that, but it's like just from the pure taunt, it kind of takes away from some of the luster on it.
Definitely.
And then kind of transitioning over, staying on the college side of things, the men's final is tonight, and we've got UConn versus San Diego State. I'm not sure this is a national championship that many people predicted. I think this is probably the favorite like out of the final four teams. This is probably the most picked outcome. But in terms of
Definitely.
like the the whole field. I think we had some UConn supporters, but not that many, and almost no one had San Diego State this high. So two good teams nonetheless, but very surprising national championship game that we've got lined up for tonight.
Yeah, if you're trying to go around saying you predicted this championship game, then you're lying because it. Yeah, I don't. I mean, like you said, there were some people who believed in UConn. I think I might have had them going pretty far in a couple of my brackets, but yeah, I mean, SDSU making it this far did not like that was a shock to me. I mean, I'm a big UNR guy, so I watched a good amount of San Diego State games in the Mountain West. Like I probably watched more than like the average person who's not like a diehard SDSU fan. But
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely would not have predicted this matchup.
No, not at all.
At the start of March Madness.
And in hindsight, I guess it's not a terrible pick because their defense is playing very well right now. Good defensive team, and they kind of leverage that to make it this far. That's how they beat a good team in Alabama. So I guess like it's not as big of a surprise when you kind of look at it in hindsight, but at the same time, that's kind of you can say that about just about anything. That
Yeah,
isn't
because my whole
really.
thing with San Diego State, and everyone was talking about how elite their defense was, only giving up 50 something points per game. But
Mhm.
my biggest concern or like biggest gripe with them was, well, how are they, how is that, top defense going to stack up versus, more legit teams? Because obviously, you're in the Mountain West the entire season. The basketball just, isn't simply as good as it is in some of the, tougher conferences. So I thought maybe their defensive rating was a little skewed because of that, but they have shown far and away that the defense is just legit and it doesn't really matter who they're going against. They're going to make your top scorer's life very difficult. I mean, we saw with Brendan Miller. He like what had the worst field goal percentage in like history for a
Yeah.
single player.
And like off the back of that, I pulled up the numbers just to kind of be sure. They gave up 71 against Florida Atlantic, which wasn't their best showing on the defensive end. But if you're a defensive team that gives up 71 and you're still able to go out there and win, I think that's a good showing for your team, kind of first off.
Yeah, shows
And
the
then
versatility, I think.
yeah. And then, but prior to that, they gave up 56 against Creighton and 64 against Alabama. Those are two really good offensive teams, and those are two pretty low numbers in terms of what you're giving up. So I think that goes to show how good they are on the defensive end of the court and how they were able, to your point, they picked up the play against the elite teams when the time came. And then for UConn, another really solid team. Obviously, they were big. Like they were a big team heading into the season that people were high on, but that kind of shine came off a little bit with some bad runs, and then they eventually picked it up, and they kind of rode that momentum into March, and have honestly just been blowing teams out. I thought that Miami game was going to be much closer in the Final Four, and it really wasn't all that close of a game. Sure, there were moments of it, but I thought that UConn really held that, held momentum in that for almost the whole game, which is very impressive against a hot Miami team.
Yeah, UConn, I think last week, or I forget exactly when me and Anthony were going over like the Elite Eight, I think it was. I can't exactly remember, but UConn was my pick from that point. It just seemed like a, top to bottom, really well put together team. They just when I watch them play, it just seems like everybody's always in the right spot. They always make the right pass. I was saying how like they remind me of like the old like Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich Spurs teams where it's just anybody can kill you at any moment. They just play a great brand of team basketball. Everybody is always in the right spot. Makes the right pass and they hit the right shots, and it's clearly worked out for them. I mean, they've the last two games they've absolutely blown out their opponents. I mean, they blew out Miami, and then that Gonzaga game, right? That would have been their last game before this.
Let me double check. I've still got it pulled up. Yeah,
Was that
Gonzaga
yeah?
was when
Was that
they
game they
beat them by
blew out
30 or
Gonzaga?
something.
Yeah, it's just I mean it's one thing to be beating these teams, but to be beating them by like this much, like I mean, a lot of people, had Gonzaga, m- as the second representative in this championship game, and UConn just flat out dismantled them.
Yeah.
It was
And
never close.
And they have a lot of talented players too. I mean, Sunogo is one of the best bigs in the country. Jordan Hawkins is one of the best shooters in the country. They have a lot of talent on the floor at any given time. Good depth too. And they're a very hard team to beat. And going off what I said, or going off what you said, where you said that UConn was probably the top team when you talked with Anthony. Me and Griffin talked about the Final Four last week too, and had very similar thoughts where this UConn team is very good. And Griffin was pretty high on San Diego State as well. So I'll give him credit for that because he was higher on San Diego State than I was, and they went out there and they're in the Natty. So credit to him on that call. And then previewing this game, how do you see this game going, and what are you thinking heading into finals here?
Right, just right off the bat, if I had to pick, I would probably lean towards UConn,
Hmm.
but I am really looking forward to that big man matchup. I mean, you talk about UConn. They had that Sonoga guy who's premier big man, and then SDSU has Mensa, who I
Hmm.
just every single game this season, it's been like absolutely insane watching him play. He just blocks shots at a crazy level, and he's definitely been one of their better players. Definitely one of the reasons why they've made it this far. So I'm really excited to kind of see that big man matchup down low and see kind of how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the matchup. We've obviously talked a lot about San Diego State's defense. I'm interested to see how UConn scores against them. I'm interested to see how they attack that because they can play inside or outside. I'm interested to kind of see how they approach that and what angle they take there. But that should be a very interesting matchup. And I am going to take UConn in this game. I think UConn's just too high at this point. Um, I think that San Diego State's a very good team. And with that being said, I've been too low on San Diego State for probably the entirety of the tournament. So, I'm sitting here saying UConn's going to win, but admittedly, I have been a little bit lower on San Diego State than I should be.
Yeah, and the one thing with San Diego State that they have that I absolutely love is they have good experienced guard play. I mean, Matt Bradley was one of the better just players overall in the Mountain West. And I mean, even in that Bama game they played, he didn't score like at all until like the last 3 minutes of the game, and they were still able to win. But last game he had like close to 20, and just that offense is so much more efficient when he's able to go out and get his own bucket. And then they have Darian Trammell, who's had a couple big games too at the guard position when Matt Bradley hasn't been able to step up. And I think having good experience, competent, especially guard play in some of these bigger games can be a huge deal because you have these guys who kind of can understand the game a little bit more, can better control the tempo and make sure the game doesn't swing one way or another too far out of control. So I
Mhm.
definitely think that could be something that keeps SDSU in the game.
Yeah, and then kind of off the back of that, the talk Chickster brought it up in the college basketball channel, but the line on this game is San Diego State plus 7.5, and UConn obviously the 7.5 point favorite. Um, that's a close line. Something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about it and just kind of mulling it over in my head since Chickster said that. On one hand, I say, wow, UConn's been blowing everybody out. I'll take them 7.5 any day of the week. On the other hand, I go, for every reason you just said, San Diego State finds a way to stay in games, keep them close, win or lose. I think they have the ability to keep it closer than 7.5. So I'm really riding the fence here. But I think I'm going to lean the UConn minus 7.5. just because they have been so hot. But I think they have that set at a really tricky line for the reasons that you just mentioned about
I mean, yeah,
San
Vegas
Diego
always
State's ability
knows.
to keep. Yeah, they know too well on this one. That's one of those where I looked at the line and I was like, oh, come on. Get it wrong once. Get it wrong, please.
Yeah, I would probably lean towards SDSU. I still pick UConn to win, but I'd probably take SDSU at the 7.5 to lose by less than that, just because I mean I feel like the defense is just proven to be so good. It's shown that they can keep them in games versus not just any team or not just anybody, but against some of the top teams in the tournament. And I think defense, or especially just team defense, has become just sort of a lost art,
Hmm.
especially in basketball, where everyone's so obsessed with scoring, 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 making 3 pointers, that teams sometimes forget that you can be just as effective if the other team doesn't score either. So I think SDSU has a team that's built to like, not really be blown out as
Hmm.
much. Like they've built a team that can allow them to kind of stay in contests with most teams in the NCAA. So that's probably why I would lean towards, SDSU keeping it close. But it's
Yeah,
college basketball, so
yeah,
you never really
exactly.
know.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then kind of switching over from the college basketball talk, we have some similar college stuff, not exactly the same, NFL draft stuff. Some big news in the draft came out this morning, and we'll start with Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter's agent basically came out and said that they weren't going to meet with teams outside of the top 10, weren't going to do interviews with teams outside of the top 10. Noteworthy here because Carter has had fair share of character concerns that have been raised. We can sit here and debate the legitimacy all day. I think that is an issue anytime there's character concerns in the NFL draft because sometimes they're serious, sometimes they're not. Um, this one is not a great situation, but also that doesn't mean Jalen Carter can't be productive at the next level. But he's not. He's choosing not to interview with teams outside of the top 10. So I guess just what are your initial reactions to that, and what do you make of that?
I mean, realistically, I don't see Jalen Carter going out of the top 10, even with all these character issues that happened. I would be very surprised if he fell out of the top 10, because that would especially mean that my Eagles don't take him at 10. From which, if he's available at 10 and we don't take him, I would be very confused. I still probably don't think it's the best look to just kind of be like, well, I don't even need to interview with anybody else, especially like if this was just like the one thing that was arising regarding his character, then it probably wouldn't be that big a deal. But when you add this on top of, all the other stuff that's come out in the last month or two, it's probably not the best look. I tend to not really, value all these character issue flaws too much, because at the end of the day, if you can play football, you can play football, and the league will find a spot for you. I mean, everyone had all those character issues about Micah Parsons a couple years ago, and all these analysts were coming out and saying all the character issues he has. And well, wouldn't you know it, he's Micah Parsons will probably end up winning a few defensive player of the year awards by the time he retires. So it's if you can play at an elite level, you can play at an elite level. I mean, character issues and your character is definitely something that should matter. But I mean, what he was drag racing, or he was out like racing. He wasn't drunk. So I feel like if you're a team that's willing to just completely pass up on that, potential level of talent because of that, then I think you're potentially missing out on a, very, very, very good player. I mean, the Raiders have already come out and like said that they're not going to draft Jalen Carter.
Yeah, that felt weird too because that was kind of like, why do you need to make this public? Like that
Yeah,
was kind of my sense of it. Is it was like, why are you telling teams this?
yeah.
Like
The Raiders have just got bullied into not drafting Jalen Carter.
Um, but like going off your point, I agree where it's like as long as you are like it obviously depends on the level of character concerns, right? There's things to be worried about, there's things to not be worried about. Um, but usually if you're not breaking any laws, that's when things, or any serious laws, that's when things kind of are the line, I think. And like in the past, Kayvon Thibodeau, character concerns, ended up playing well his rookie year. Parsons, like you listed, Laramie Tunsil famously fell
Yeah.
a ton of spots, ended up being, the player that he was projected to be coming out of the draft, was a top five, player. He was projected to get taken that high, and then he falls and still has that same level of talent. So I agree. I don't think he should really fall. And the other thing is, a lot of people are worried about the pro day. And the thing about the pro day is that the pro day was shortly after he got arrested. So it's like, I'm sure there was some level of like stress or some level of like, not like, I'm sure there were other things going on in his life that kind of prevented him from being in top form. So it's like, I imagine once he gets those things sorted out, which should come before the season starts. When that happens, I imagine he'll be fine on the field. The only thing that I don't like about this is that it kind of inhibits the ability for someone to trade up, or decreases the chance that someone trades up to take him. It's like, because if you're a top 10 player, you're probably going to one of the top 10 worst teams in the league. This year's a little different because there is the Eagles at 10, Lions at 6, Seahawks at 5. They're a little bit better just because those aren't their originally owned picks.
Yeah.
But I think there's some opportunities where teams could trade up and grab them, and now those teams are probably not as likely to do that. I think that's really the only thing here that's kind of shooting them in the foot. But I do think the Eagles at 10 is probably the stop for a potential Jalen Carter slide. I don't see him sliding much further than the Eagles, because if you're the Eagles sitting there at 10, you're not going to get a better player.
Yeah.
And you're not taking a quarterback. There's all these things that the Eagles are in a position to do where bringing in Jalen Carter is
And
much easier for them.
Howie loves to bring in the big boys. He loves to use draft picks on the guys in the trenches. So I would be extremely shocked if Carter's on the board at 10 and we don't take him. I think when Trey was doing his like war room thing, that's who we had us taking. And then yeah, you mentioned Jalen Carter's, like poor showing at the pro day. I was kind of wanted to touch on that because I feel like on both ends, people sometimes just overvalue these pro days and what these guys are doing in, a shirt and t-shirt. I mean, I still vividly remember when Zach Wilson was making all these throws in the pro day, these 50, 60-yard on the run cross body throws, and was looking amazing. And everyone, was like, oh my God, Zach Wilson's the future. Zach Wilson's going to be the best quarterback in the draft class. And then it's like, well, it's the end. We realize at the end of the day, it's one thing to throw to a guy who's not being guarded in a shirt and t-shirt versus actually being on the field and having to read a defense. So I think Jalen Carter is a great player. Obviously, he didn't play as ideally as he would have wanted to in the pro day, but I just feel like it doesn't really benefit you to, alter your stock on him too much because of one pro day.
Yep, I'm with you. And the team sitting there with 2 first-round picks as well. Seahawks, we already listed them, but Seahawks, Lions, and Eagles. It's like those teams, the potential for drafting Jalen Carter comes with a little bit extra risk since you're doing it with someone else's pick, and you have your own somewhere there. The Lions are back on the clock earliest again at 18. But it's like those teams have a little bit more luxury to play with and take a risk. If they want to consider it a risk, they can, but I think it's probably a little bit safer than a risk. So it's like those teams probably have a little bit of extra wiggle room. So it's like if I were Carter, those are probably the teams that I'd be focused on with interviewing and going through the process with.
Yeah, Jalen Carter and Aiden Hutchinson could be nasty.
I hope so. As a Lions fan, I'm not going to sit here and complain about getting Jalen Carter at 6. And they need D-line help bad. They shored up some other positions, but
They got free safety by taking Gardner Johnson.
They did do that. Safety position's looking nice. We added some corners. Really, the only thing we need is shut up the D-line, maybe another linebacker. That's a whole nother discussion, but like Jalen Carter at 6 makes a lot of sense for them.
It would definitely fill a need for you guys. That's for sure.
Fill a need with the best player on the board. So, and then also in the NFL draft here, reports came out. It was either last night or this morning, one of the two, that the Titans are interested in trading up from 11 to 3. I think this is interesting because it means a handful of things. It means one, that'll obviously change up the draft a lot.
They have to be going quarterback, right? They're trading up
Yeah,
to 3.
it almost has to be going quarterback, which means they're probably, and almost has to be Anthony Richardson too. I
Yeah,
don't, I
because I mean
don't think you,
Stroud and Young are gonna go 1-2. It seems like.
and you probably don't make the move for Levis, I
Yeah,
assume. Because at that point, you're probably, if you're looking to take Levis, you probably try and make a trade with Seahawks at 5, Lions at 6, and you let Richardson go at 4. Um, so that's probably not the move there. But it also means they're out on Malik Willis. Also
yeah,
means
that's what
they're
I was
out
just
on
gonna say. It's a
Tannehill.
must.
So it's like there's a lot going on here. And it really shake up the draft and kind of the landscape, though, what the Titans are doing as a team.
Yeah, because the Titans are in this weird spot, just kind of in that like purgatory zone where they're not going to be good enough to win a Super Bowl, but they're not like outright tanking or going to outright be bad enough to ever be picking in the top 3 or top 4. So I don't know what that trade would look like in order to to trade up to 3, but I mean, yeah, it's clear that Malik Willis has shown them nothing. I mean, obviously, we all know what Ryan Tannehill pretty much is.
Mm-hmm. I think it screams like that's not a bad situation for Richardson to go to. I don't think it's ideal by any means, but like sitting behind Ryan Tannehill for a year, I don't think is a bad idea. And then worst case scenario, like when they went to Willis last year, Richardson I think is going to have more impact in the run game, so it'd be a little bit easier to kind of deal with that situation, even if he isn't 100% ready to throw at an elite level yet. If he hasn't made it that far in his development, you can trust the run game a little bit more with him in comparison to Malik Willis too. But like for Malik Willis, it pretty much means that they're out on him. Like one
Yeah,
year you're gone, and they're a lot less patient than what it seems like the Commanders are with Sam Howell. A lot less patient than what the Falcons seem to be with Desmond Ritter, assuming the Falcons don't make a move for a quarterback this offseason. But they're showing him less patience, which he didn't look great, so I kind of understand it. But I don't really see the point in drafting him if you're just going to toss him out after 1 year. That's more of a criticism of the pick itself rather than what they're doing now.
well, yeah, especially when you look in, it's not like Malik Willis had a whole lot to work with. I mean, Traylon Burks got hurt like midway through the season, was dealing with injuries.
Luan tore his ACL, so they were
Yeah,
running backup left tackle.
and then was Derrick Henry healthy the whole season? Or I feel like he missed some time as well.
I think he missed some time, I want to say.
So yeah, he missed some time. So you were just kind of dealing with an offense that didn't really have a true weapon. I mean, who realistically is he? If Traylon Burks is hurt, who is he realistically throwing to on that team that's going to be able to make an impact?
And Traylon Burks isn't like an outstanding. He didn't look as good as the other rookies either. So it's not like,
He picked
um,
it up a little bit, like before he got injured. He was kind of starting to pick it up, and then yeah, he suffered that injury, which was a big blow.
Derrick Henry did play all 16 games last year, but
He did.
once again, the O line wasn't great. So it kind of, they didn't really wasn't as effective running the ball,
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah. Derrick Henry was not. I mean, obviously he's still one of the better backs, but he definitely was not playing up to his usual elite standards last season.
Yep, I'm with you. And they also, like the Titans, they cut a lot of kind of meat this offseason off the bone, like release Taylor Lewan, release Ben Jones, I believe, and they released several players where they're kind of shedding salary. I wonder if it's smarter for them to go quarterback this year, or if they could be one of the teams that decide to punt on this year's quarterback class
Yeah,
and try and grab one next year. Um,
maybe shore up some other positions.
yeah, and especially in this year's draft, we're at 11. You're probably looking at a spot where you get, at worst, you're looking at one of the better offensive linemen, whether that
Yeah,
be Skoransky, Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones. So it's like they can go offensive line at 11, maybe trade down, stack some picks. So it's like there's other things they can do too. I'm not sure that, yeah, I like Anthony Richardson as a prospect, you're probably not going to want to play him with the supporting cast he's going to have this year at least.
Yeah, I just feel like them kind of trading up for a quarterback right now would just kind of be almost like a, red button panic mode. Like we're trying to jumpstart this we're trying to jumpstart this rebuild as soon as possible, and kind of skip all the other steps and hope that Anthony Richardson is good enough to just kind of lead us to victory. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best plan of action for this Titans team to take.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they've been doing with Derrick Henry for the last couple of years, where it's just like, hey, Derrick Henry will win us some games. We'll lean on Derrick Henry and we'll run the ball with him. And I think if they would have traded Derrick Henry, it would have been much more of the sign of a rebuild. But it's interesting because you're not going to get a quarterback who's day one elite level at 3. And it's really like, how do I word this? Like, I think the best way to start a rebuild, like you said, they're trying to jump into it a little early. One of the best ways to start a rebuild is to tear it down and kind of start fresh on the cap. Even if you don't get a lot of players or picks in return for the guys you're letting go, kind of stripping the cap hit and then kind of making some strong draft selections is the best way to start it. And I'm not sure that they're doing that. Maybe they hit it out of the park this year with the great draft class and go quarterback next year. Maybe they hit it out of the park and start with Richardson and kind of really restart it. But right now, I don't think they're really in that position to go out there. They need a quarterback, I agree, but I don't know if they're in the best position to kind of start that, kind of like you alluded to.
Yeah, I feel like they'd have to give up just way too much to move up to 3, and I feel like it just wouldn't be worth it.
11-3 is a big jump, and
Yeah.
if you're the Cardinals, you probably want to stack. I assume at least one first-round pick on that, probably next year's first. So if you ride with Ryan Tannehill, and you don't really add a lot of pieces in the draft this year, that next year's first-round pick could end up being a very valuable pick, which might be a better quarterback prospect. End up being a better quarterback prospect than you're getting out of Richardson this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. And Jack, we're sitting at about 37 minutes, a little bit of a short show, but I've got to run. We talked the big topics, I think, NCAA finals, recap of the women's game, preview of the men's game tonight, and then touch on the bigger stories in the NFL draft. We obviously didn't get to touch on baseball too much, but I think in the upcoming days we should have some baseball guys on.
For sure.
I assume Bag Donuts and Hannah Fan are running it tomorrow, and they'll probably talk baseball. So for anyone tuning in that's sitting on the edge of their seats for baseball talk, there will be plenty of baseball talk over the next couple of days, I assume. But Jack, is there anything that you want to throw out there before we end it off today?
No, I think like you said, we got most of the big basics covered.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, nothing else really to add.
Yeah. All right. It's a wrap on the Daily Show, and someone will be back here tomorrow running the seats. Thank you to everyone who tuned in.